Hello and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music with your keyboard tired presenter replete with mullet, the 80s mixtaper. In truth, I'm wearing a Beastie Boys t-shirt and as it's the medium of podcast, could have totally gotten away with that. And as a man who suffers male pattern baldness, I love a mullet, but there we are. Anyway, today we dive back into October 1982, but before we do, another absolutely lovely person has bought me a coffee, or quite a few coffees in this case, on my Buy Me a Coffee page. Scott Benning. Scott says, been enjoying the pod since day one, keep up the great work. Well, Scott, it is an honour to know you were there, and you are one of the original ones, a proper OG from back in the day. So as now per our agreement, I need to roast you into an 80s music situation. Now I can guess that from your email suffix you might be Canadian. So the obvious thing to do would be to drop you into Rush, but that's not how I roll on this show. Whimsy is my middle name. It's not, I don't actually have one. So instead, being a Scot, you are in fact Australian, and you have one very specific claim to fame. You were briefly a member of the Aussie band Men at Work, hired solely for your ability to hit empty beer bottles and produce a tune. They came to record the legendary song Down Under, and in your pomp, the first 4 seconds of the song are all you. Unfortunately, that was where your contribution began and ended, and in a fit of jealousy, while touring you'd come off stage after your 4-second bit every night and using your drumsticks, smash up the boys' rider, reducing their beer stocks to a shadow of their former selves with nothing but bottled water in sight. Well, something had to give, and subsequently you were fired soon after. Ever to be the man known for playing the empty bottles in the 4-second opener of that song, or something like that. Interestingly, we'll be introducing Men at Work in about 5 weeks, but the song has even less bottle noise, so Scott won't be happy. Anyway, if you'd like to support the show and have your name roasted into an 80s pop situation, you can buy me a coffee on my Buy Me a Coffee link, which you'll find in the episode description. And as always, if you like what you hear, do remember to hit subscribe, and any reviews always help, please. So back to today and the first half of Playlist 48. So we're now slap bang in October 1982 and we get to introduce another of the big hitters of the decade. Last playlist, it was Culture Club. This playlist, it's Tears for Fears. The Pretenders also make a triumphant return out of absolute tragedy. Air Supply prove that yacht rock still has some breath left in its lungs. Spandau ditch the new romantic costumes for something far more poppy. The kids from Fame will have us all reaching for the tissues. Dexys Midnight Runners make us giggle with a Top of the Pops prank. And finally, Steve Winwood gets a first, second and third life out of one amazing song. As always, we can't play the tracks on the pod due to copyright laws, but if you go to the episode description, you'll find links to playlists for both Spotify and Apple Music, plus a full track listing if those links should fail on your pod platform of choice. So you too can listen along. So let's jump in and get back to the music. As we slip into October 1982, we have a song that perfectly bottles up the cold, synth-drenched colours of autumn. This track serves as our official introduction to a duo from Bath who turned trauma in childhood and adolescence into pure pop cultural currency. Before we delve into the psychological heartbeat of their background, let's let the music do the talking. Here is the third single from their catalogue, but their very first actual chart hit. Let's meet one of the most interesting and musically developed groups of the 80s. This is Tears for Fears, and this is Mad World. Track 1, Playlist 48. What is there personally to say about Mad World? Well, Tears for Fears have quite a few iconic songs in this decade that it's hard to label this song as their best or their biggest. But as introductions go, it's absolutely on the money. And as a 4-year-old kid, there was so much going on. It was like hearing a Bond theme or something. For their first proper charting single, it was so well developed. And that became their story of their music. And if that synthetic pulse doesn't make you want to put on an oversized trench coat and stare longingly out of a damp window, I don't know what will. Mad World came to occupy the number 3 spot on the official UK singles chart in November 1982. Not bad at all for a first charting hit. But let's rewind slightly and travel southwest to Bath, Somerset. This is where Roland Orzabal and Kurt Smith met as teenagers. Contrary to their later electronic sound, they originally bonded over a shared appreciation for heavier rock acts like Thin Lizzy and Blue Oyster Cult. However, their first professional foray into the music industry was decidedly less heavy metal and far more mod revival. In 1978, they became core members of a 5-piece power pop band called Graduate. They dressed in sharp suits and actively channeled the energy of contemporary mod acts. Do check out the pictures on Google if you can. You would not believe 2 of these guys become Tears for Fears. Graduate managed to release an album titled Acting My Age in 1980, along with a single called Elvis Should Play Ska. While that single completely missed the top 100 in the UK, it performed surprisingly well in parts of Europe like Spain and Switzerland. Orzabal later noted the stylistic mismatch of the era, joking that while electronic artists like Gary Newman were reaching the top of the charts wearing black eyeliner, Graduate were busy doing Knees Up to Madness. Unsurprisingly, the group split in 1981. Following the breakup, Orzabal and Smith worked as session musicians for a short-lived Bath electronic band called Neon. This brief stint was crucial because it was here they met drummer Manny Elias, who would join the new band. Tired of the guitar pop scene, Orzabal and Smith shifted their focus entirely toward electronic music, drawing heavy inspiration from Talking Heads, Peter Gabriel and Brian Eno. They initially developed the rather bleak monster History of Headaches. Thankfully, they discarded that name after exploring the work of American psychologist Arthur Janov, the pioneer of primal therapy. Janov's theories posited that adult neurosis is caused by repressed trauma suffered during childhood, and that the cure is to directly re-experience that pain. Fascinated by this concept, they famously renamed themselves Tears for Fears, which brings us directly to the creation of Mad World. Roland Orzabal wrote the track when he was just 19 years old. At the time, he was living in a flat in Bath, on the dole, looking down from his bedroom window at the centre of the city. He watched the local commuters milling about their repetitive daily lives with a distinct sense of teenage alienation and disgust. He later admitted in a retrospective that because Bath is actually an affluent and historic city and really not that mad, the song from his perspective back then probably should have been called Bourgeois World. Musically, Orzabal was trying to write a driving new wave song, explicitly inspired by the rhythm of Duran Duran's Girls on Film. He composed it entirely on an acoustic guitar. When he initially tried to record the lead vocals himself, he felt the results were lacking. He suggested that bassist Kurt Smith take over the microphone. The moment Smith sang it, his naturally soft and more melancholic delivery transformed the track. Orzabal recalled that suddenly the vocal dynamic sounded fabulous. The blueprint for the recording was heavily shaped by their early mentor Ian Stanley, who would join the band as well. Stanley owned an 8-track home studio where the band was invited to demo their early work. On these initial demos, they took the acoustic guitar rhythm and translated it onto a Roland CR78 drum machine. They ran the gear through an MXR pitch transposer to give the electronic percussion a denser, distinct character, while a Roland Jupiter 4 synth laid down the bass line. The track was later fully produced for single release by Ross Cullum and Chris Hughes, the latter famously we've met many times before, known as the former drummer for Adam and the Ants. The song's lyrical depth is rooted directly in Janov's primal therapy, with the famous line about the dreams in which I'm dying, referencing a psychological release of pent-up emotional tension. Now, for any fans of this song, there is a notable, frequently misheard lyric in the final chorus, which is actually Halargen World. Kurt Smith later clarified that Halarge was an imaginary planet invented as a running joke by producers Chris Hughes and Ross Cullum during the sessions. Smith ad-libbed the word as a joke during the lead vocal recording, and the team kept it in the final mix. But ever since, people either hear Illogical World, Raunchy Young World, enlarging your world, or a number of other interesting, if not amusing, guesses. Before Mad World, Tears for Fears had released 2 singles, Suffer the Children and an early version of Pell Shelter, produced by Mike Howlett, both of which failed to chart. Realising the commercial strength of Mad World, Polygram executives pushed it out as the 3rd single in September 1982. It exploded up the charts, prompting the band to shoot a low-budget promotional video at a country estate on the cheap. They bussed up their friends and family from Bath to act as extras. The woman seen having the birthday party in the video is actually Ozabel's mother. Mad World became the foundational cornerstone of their 1983 debut album The Hurting, cementing their reputation for introspective, beautifully emotional synth pop. Its cultural legacy was famously renewed nearly 2 decades later with the minimalistic 2001 chart topper cover by Michael Andrews and Gary Jules for the film Donnie Darko. But the original remains a definitive pure monument to a 19-year-old looking out at the world from his window. What a way to start the show. For track 2, we briefly return to late 1981. We've just left the Pretenders riding the wave of their hauntingly melancholic cover of Ray Davies' I Go to Sleep, which is episode 32.5. It is a top 10 hit in the UK, showing Chrissie Hynde's ability to turn longing into a sharp structural pop force. The original quartet, Hynde, guitarist James Honeyman Scott, bassist Pete Farndon and drummer Martin Chambers feel unstoppable. They are a post-punk jigsaw puzzle that fits perfectly, balance beaming between the new wave sheen and raw leather-jacketed pub rock grit. But rock and roll has a brutal habit of pulling the floor out from under its most brilliant architects. Within a few short months, the picture-perfect frame of the band crumbles completely, dissolving into a fog of escalating heavy drug abuse, professional banishment and unexpected mortality. Chrissie Hynde is left standing in the wreckage of her own band, staring down an uncertain future with a song that started as a love letter to her partner but quickly morphed into a survival anthem. This is Back on the Chain Gang. We return to a band's worst case scenario. On the 14th of June 1982, Pete Farndon is officially sacked from the band due to his severe disruptive drug addiction. It is a heartbreaking but necessary decision made by Hynde and Honeyman Scott to protect the group's future. But fate delivers a second, even more devastating blow just 2 days later. On the 16th of June 1982, James Honeyman Scott is found dead from heart failure caused by a cocaine overdose at the age of only 25. Suddenly, the guitar engine that defined the unique identity of the group is gone. Only Hynde and drummer Martin Chambers remain, totally shocked and grieving. The world thinks the group is completely finished, but Chrissie Hynde refuses to let the music die. She later notes that continuing the work is the only way to honour what they started. On the 20th of July 1982, just over a month after Honeyman Scott's sudden death, Hynde and Chambers walk into Air Studios in London to cut a new track. They don't have a full band, so producer Chris Thomas brings in a crew of elite studio session players to fill the void. On lead guitar, Billy Bremner, the veteran player from the pub rock band Rockpile. On rhythm guitar, Robbie McIntosh, who would later step up to become a permanent member of the group's next iteration. On bass, Tony Butler, who is already working downstairs at Air Studios on a recording project for Big Country. We'll meet them soon. Engineered by Steve Churchyard, who replaces longtime collaborator Bill Price for the session. The makeshift group tracks the song live, tightly clustered together in Studio One. The song Back on the Chain Gang is an emotional shapeshifter. Initially, Hynde had started writing it about her turbulent, crumbling romantic relationship with Ray Davies. The line, "I found a picture of you," literally refers to a photo of Davies that Hynde kept in her wallet. However, following the tragedy of June, the lyrical context completely shifts. The song transforms into a bittersweet tribute to Honeyman Scott, a public purging of grief wrapped inside an upbeat jangle pop arrangement. The track makes brilliant use of visual and auditory motifs, featuring distinct hammer swing grunts in the chorus that intentionally echo Sam Cooke's 1962 classic Chain Gang. The hammer sounds were actually recorded by studio assistant Jeremy Alom, who banged together the heavy 25-pound metal weights used as ballast for large studio boom stands. This clinking sound represents the relentless, heavy grind of modern life and the sheer effort of pushing forward after a trauma. Released by Sire Records in September 1982, the single becomes a massive commercial triumph. It rockets all the way to number 5 on the US Billboard Hot 100 and climbs to number 17 on the UK singles chart. The track is later integrated into the King of Comedy film soundtrack in 1983, before finding its permanent home on the band's brilliant third studio album, Learning to Crawl, in January 1984. From tragedy to an anthem for survival in a few short months. Now for track 3, we're going to demonstrate that there was still a place for intercontinental soft rock in the pop firmament of late 1982, something we'll also see in Playlist 50 in a few weeks' time. Yacht rock is not dead yet, folks. When we last left our favourite transatlantic soft rock duo Air Supply all the way back in 1980 in episode 13.5, they were all out of love. They had nothing left but a suitcase full of feelings, soaring high notes and an incredibly healthy bank balance. You might have thought British-born songwriter Graham Russell and Australian lead singer Russell Hitchcock had peaked with that teardrop-stained masterpiece. But the corporate pop machine demanded more sentimentality. Thus, Arista Records boss Clive Davis kept the studio doors firmly unlocked. The duo marched right back into the charts with an unapologetically happy pivot. Turn your collar up, grab a Long Island iced tea and get ready for a trip to the beach. Here is the first single from their 7th studio album, Now and Forever. This is Even the Nights Are Better. If you listen closely to those lyrics, you will know that Air Supply finally found what they were looking for. The dark, desolate days of 1980 are officially over. The singer starts by admitting he was the lonely one, wondering why love had gone. But then a new love arrives who has also been lonely and sparks a literal fire in his heart. Suddenly, even the days are brighter. It is an audio injection of optimism. After All Out of Love conquered the global charts in 1980, the duo did not slow down. In 1981, they released the album The One That You Love, which spawned the massive hit Here I Am, Just When I Thought I Was Over You, and the title track, which became their very first number 1 single on the US Billboard Hot 100. By the time 1982 rolled around, they looked like a guaranteed banker for the record labels. For their next record, Now and Forever, they teamed up again with producer Harry Maslin. However, unlike many of their signature tracks penned by Graham Russell himself, this lead single was sourced from outside writers. It was written by the songwriting trio of J.L. Wallace, Kenneth Bell and Terry Skinner. The musical structure relied heavily on a deliberate solo vocal, delicate piano chords and a sweeping string section interplay that linked right back to the group's past hits. To accompany the track, a music video was commissioned and filmed in and around the boardwalk, beach and amusement area of Coney Island in Brooklyn, New York. The video features a classic 1982 double-date narrative, complete with riding bicycles on the pier, wandering past the Ferris wheel and smiling on spinning amusement rides. When the single was released in mid-1982, the charts welcomed it with open arms. In the US, it hit the top spot on the Billboard Adult Contemporary chart, staying there for 4 consecutive weeks across July and August. Across on the US Billboard Hot 100, it peaked at number 5, giving Air Supply their astonishing 7th consecutive top 5 hit in America. Internationally, it reached number 7 on the Canadian singles chart, number 9 in Ireland, but a more modest number 44 in the UK. While the parent album Now and Forever stalled out at number 25 on the album charts, Even the Nights Are Better became a staple of the yacht rock and soft rock eras. It proved that Air Supply could fix a broken heart just as well as they could break one. For track 4, Spandau Ballet are on the precipice of becoming massive pop stars. It is late 1982 and the London Blitz Club dust has finally settled. When we last checked in with London's premier new romantic pioneers back in the glorious horn-drenched summer of 1981, they were riding high on the minimalist, funk-mutated thud of chart number 1, I Don't Need This Pressure On, episode 26.5, a track that felt like a sweat-soaked night out on Soho's Greek Street. They were the undisputed kings of the underground scene, wearing structural tartan kilts, frilly sashes, and looking remarkably like high-fashion pirates on a fantasy weekend getaway. But subcultures burn fast. The Blitz was done. The new romantic label already done away with. Not that anyone liked it anyway. While their second album, Diamond, yielded hits, principal songwriter Gary Kemp realised that the insular world of the club underground had structural limits if the band wanted to achieve global dominance. The band had to adapt, shed their avant-garde skin and do something far more radical than looking weird. They had to look accessible. They traded away the frills, sashes and other paraphernalia, opting instead for a style shift that felt distinctly more democratic. They put on clothes perhaps less Anthony Price and more man at CNA. The sharp suits were still a tune or two away. This stylistic pivot directly mirrored their ongoing sonic evolution. To transition smoothly away from club-focused experimentalism towards pure, unadulterated global pop, they needed a bridge. They found it in mid-August 1982 at Red Bus Studios in Paddington. There they teamed up with producers Tony Swain and Steve Jolly, hot off their success with the pop group Imagination. It was a trial session that changed everything. The result was a track that served as the glossy precursor to the multi-platinum triumphs of Gold and True. This is Lifeline. We return to August 1982. Spandau Ballet entered Red Bus Studios for a 5-day session spanning the 16th to the 20th of August. Working alongside Tony Swain and Steve Jolly, the band was testing the waters to see if a new creative partnership could salvage their international momentum. What they discovered was an immediate, joyful creative chemistry that had been missing from their previous, more tense recording sessions. Swain and Jolly brought a polished commercial sheen that elevated Gary Kemp's songwriting from insular club rhythms to widescreen pop melodies. Released as a single on the 24th of September 1982, Lifeline acted as the first official taste of what would become their career-defining third studio album, True. The track built beautifully upon the pop sensibilities that they had initially flirted with, but Lifeline pushed the formula much further. It features a driving bass line from Martin Kemp, sharp guitar stabs and a bravura vocal performance from Tony Hadley that proved he was ready for the big leagues. Musically, Lifeline didn't win over every critic immediately, receiving mixed contemporary reviews from a music press protective of the band's underground roots. Yet the British record-buying public disagreed. The single entered the UK singles chart in October 1982. According to manager Steve Dagger, by the time the band boarded a flight to Nassau in the Bahamas on the 19th of October 1982 to record the rest of the True album at Compass Point Studios, Lifeline was sitting comfortably at number 7. The band had already performed it on Top of the Pops, cementing their new look and sound across the nation's TV screens. Crucially, Lifeline was also the band's very first single to register on a chart in the US, breaking through on the Billboard Bubbling Under Hot 100 at number 8. Its accompanying music video also gained early rotation on MTV, laying the essential groundwork for the massive American success of the True single the following year. Without the transitional pop blueprint of Lifeline, the band would have never unlocked the lush soul of True or the stadium-sized grandeur of Gold. It was the track where Spandau Ballet grew up, put away the Blitz outfits, and decided to become pop superstars. For track 5 today, it's time to don the spandex and take a trip to the High School of Performing Arts in Manhattan one last time. In 1982, The world was fully captured by the cultural momentum of Fame. It began with Alan Parker's gritty 1980 feature film, crystallised by Irene Cara's explosive title track, which we heard in episode 44, which set a global blueprint for the performing arts drama. By the time the property transitioned into a weekly television drama on NBC in early 1982, a curious geographic divergence occurred. In the US, the television show struggled for steady network ratings. Across the Atlantic, however, the UK experienced outright hysteria. The British public didn't just watch the show, they consumed the music as a singular pop phenomenon under the moniker The Kids from Fame. Their self-titled debut album spent weeks at the top of the charts, but the true emotional peak of that first wave was a track originally written years prior. It was repurposed to create one of the most memorable and devastatingly real chapters in 1980s television history. It's easy to listen to the next track as just a bunch of teen thespians singing a song. It is so much more than that. That song, of course, was Starmaker. Okay, if you don't know the story of this song and you've recently suffered grief, let me warn you now, you might genuinely need a box of tissues and a moment. I might need a moment. Starmaker was not originally forged into the fictional New York City High School of the Performing Arts. It was written by the legendary songwriting duo of Bruce Roberts and Carol Bayer Sager. Roberts originally recorded the track for his own self-titled debut album back in 1977. It sat as an obscure piece of adult contemporary songwriting until music producers of the famed television show unearthed it for the series' first season. Interestingly, the song actually made its subtle television debut as background music in the 7th episode of Season 1 titled The Strike. However, its definitive performance came in the Season 1 finale, an episode titled A Special Place, which originally aired on the 6th of May 1982. The episode's script dictated a narrative where the school's beloved drama teacher, Mr. Benjamin Gregory Crandall, faces dismissal due to a sudden budget cut. In a dramatic twist, the school board eventually reconsiders and his job is saved within the show's universe. In the emotional climax of the episode, the student body, led vocalists by cast members like Erica Gimbel, who played Coco, and Valerie Landsberg, who played Doris, gather in a classroom to serenade their mentor as a gesture of gratitude. The tears captured on film during that performance were entirely real. The actor portraying Mr. Crandall, Michael Toma, was privately fighting a severe terminal battle with cancer. Though the script allowed his character to keep his job, this was intentionally designed as Toma's final episode so he could step away from the grueling production schedule. The musical farewell was, in reality, a literal goodbye from the young cast to a dying colleague. Michael Toma passed away on the 3rd of September 1982 at the age of 55, only 4 months after the episode aired. The massive emotional weight of the scene translated directly into the commercial appeal across the British Isles. Released as a single by RCA Records, Starmaker peaked at number 3 on the UK singles chart and achieved widespread success across Europe. It became the most recognisable and defining anthem of the television group's career. Driven by this success, the cast embarked on a frantic promotional tour of the UK, flying in for their world concert debut during the post-Christmas period of late December 1982. The cast held high-energy performances, hitting major UK venues like the Brighton Centre on the 27th and 28th of December, London's Wembley Arena on the 30th and 31st of December, and the National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham on the 1st of January 1983. They would return by popular demand for a massive follow-up tour across Europe, performing to packed stadiums. Decades later, Starmaker has become something of a sacred relic of 1980s pop nostalgia culture. When the surviving cast members gathered for a BBC reunion special on the 17th of June 2003, titled Fame, Remember My Name, They updated the audience on their lives and closed the programme with the performance of Starmaker. It marked the final time the core cast perform alongside dancer Jean Anthony Ray, who played Leroy. He tragically passed away just months later in November 2003. The track stands not just as a hit record, but as a monument to real-world grief captured inside a television soundstage. Let's bring our energy levels back up. Surely that's a job for Dexy's Midnight Runners, and perhaps mistakenly a legend at the game of darts. Dexys fiddled their way into our hearts last in the summer of 1982 in episode 43.5. They were standing on the absolute peak of the pop music mountain. Come On Eileen had completely conquered the UK. It was on its way to doing the exact same thing across the Atlantic on the US Billboard Hot 100. They had traded in the gritty leather-jacketed Northern Soul aesthetic of their 1980 debut album Searching for the Young Soul Rebels. Frontman Kevin Rowland had refashioned the band into a fiddle-led, dungaree-wearing Celtic soul collective. They called themselves Dexy's Midnight Runners and the Emerald Express. The album was Tu Rye. It was a massive success. So what next? How do you follow that? If you are Kevin Rowland, you try not to replicate the lightning in a bottle. You look backward to your idols. You take a track written by a Northern Irish songwriting titan, a track that pays homage to a legendary American rhythm and blues singer, and you filter it through your own brassy, stomping, string-drenched worldview. This is Jackie Wilson Said, our track 6. Jackie Wilson Said is actually a cover which will be known to the Van Morrison fans out there. It served as the opening track of his acclaimed 1972 studio album St. Dominic's Preview. Morrison's original version was a joyful swinging tribute to the great soul artist Jackie Wilson, explicitly lifting a lyrical nod from Wilson's own 1957 hit Reet Petite. Dexy's Midnight Runners recorded their version for Tu Rye. It was released as a UK single by Mercury Records in the late summer of 1982. The song proved to be a highly successful follow-up. It officially entered the UK charts and climbed all the way to number 5. However, the real legacy of Dexy's Jackie Wilson Said does not live in the recording studio, and this is where the darts player mentioned earlier on comes in. This moment lives in British television folklore. It concerns an incident that took place on the BBC's flagship music show Top of the Pops on Thursday, the 30th of September 1982. For decades, British music fans passed down a legendary piece of trivia. The story went that Dexys were invited onto the show to perform their new hit single. Because the song was an ode to African-American soul singer Jackie Wilson, the BBC production crew was instructed to project a massive image of Jackie Wilson behind the band. But, due to an almighty cock-up, or a severe breakdown in communication, the technicians supposedly got confused. Instead of the American soul icon, they projected a giant grinning picture of Jockey Wilson. Jockey was a heavy-set, beloved Scottish darts player who had won the World Darts Championship earlier that same year. For years, this was cited as one of the ultimate live television blunders. Viewers watched Kevin Rowland passionately mime about being in heaven when Jackie smiles, all while the round, joyful face of a professional darts player loomed over his shoulder. The truth is, as it turns out, far more deliberate. The idea that this was an accidental BBC blunder is a myth. It was actually an intentional joke engineered by the band and the show's crew. Dexys were known as a fairly serious band. According to violinist Helen O'Hara, Rowland was notoriously strict about the band's image, demanding total commitment from the members. Yet the idea actually started as a running joke inside the band. Band member Billy Adams later revealed the reality of the situation. Calling the song Jockey Wilson had become an in-joke during band rehearsals. While at the BBC for the television recording, Rowland decided to run with the joke. He proactively approached the Top of the Pops producer, Michael Hurl, with the explicit plan to display the picture of the Scottish darts player. Instead of a technical mistake, it was a mutual piece of television staging cooked up between the frontman and the production crew. The joke worked perfectly, perhaps too perfectly. The public completely bought into the idea of a television era. The image of Dexys performing a soul cover in front of a darts champion became an indelible pop culture moment of the 1980s. For our final track today, you know that spandex you've just taken off? Well, you'll need to put it back on again, please. But not for fame this time, actually for a song from 2004. 22 years on from our current 1982 dateline, but that's for a cover version by a DJ called Eric Prydz. In fact, we are stepping into the deeply soulful world of a Birmingham legend. If you thought the 80s belonged strictly to fresh-faced kids with asymmetric haircuts and heavy eyeliner, this next artist is here to completely shatter that illusion. He was a decorated veteran of the British music industry before half of the New Romantics had even learned what hairspray was. This next track is an upbeat synth-pop masterpiece that somehow hides a deeply melancholic story behind its bright, pulsating chords. It is a song that would enter the charts and capture the public's imagination not once, not twice, but 3 times. This is Valerie by Steve Winwood, track 7, our final track today. To understand the man behind the synthesizers in 1982, we have to flick through quite a lot of pages in one of the most astonishing CVs in British rock history. Born in Handsworth, Birmingham in 1948, Winwood was a musical prodigy who mastered the piano, drums and guitar at a young age. In 1963, at the absurdly young age of 14, he joined the Spencer Davis Group alongside his older brother Muff. By the time he was 17 years old, Winwood was singing lead vocals on a UK #1 single, Keep On Running, which famously knocked the Beatles' Day Tripper off the top of the charts. His roaring soul vocals left global audiences completely stunned that such a mature, bluesy voice belonged to a British teenager. But Winwood was never one to stand still. In 1967, he co-founded the psychedelic progressive rock outfit Traffic, pushing boundaries with a fusion of jazz, folk and rock. Then, in 1969, he joined forces with Eric Clapton, Ginger Baker and Rick Gretsch to form Blind Faith, recognised as one of the world's very first rock supergroups. Their self-titled debut album was an absolute powerhouse, hitting #1 in both the UK and the US, despite the band burning out and collapsing after a mere matter of months. After another highly successful stint reviving Traffic, Winwood eventually decided to go solo. His self-titled debut album in 1977 went largely unnoticed, but he completely struck gold with his sophomore album Ark of a Diver in 1980. Recorded entirely at his home studio in Gloucestershire, Winwood played every single musical instrument himself, generating the major solo hit While You See a Chance. This brings us directly to 1982 and his third solo album, Talking Back to the Night. Once again, acting as a one-man band, Winwood played every instrument, relying heavily on early sequencing and a combination of a Prophet 5 and Mini Moog synth to build his tracks. Now this is where it gets interesting when it comes to Valerie. Upon its initial release as a single in October 1982, Valerie was a commercial disappointment. It crawled to a miserable number 51 on the UK charts and topped out at number 70 on the Billboard Hot 100. Yet, we all know it. How do we all know it? Despite the Eric Prydz version, how? Well, the fact is the public simply wasn't ready for it. The song's upbeat, danceable tempo also hid a serious meaning. Winwood wrote the music, but the lyrics were penned by his frequent collaborator Will Jennings. In a later interview with Song Facts, Jennings explained, "Valerie is a real person whose identity I will not reveal. She was almost at the top of the world in her profession and let it slip away from her. She was a dear friend, and this was my tribute to her." Years later, Winwood confirmed the song was indeed written about American singer-songwriter Valerie Carter. Carter was a highly respected musician who sang backing vocals for icons like Linda Ronstadt and James Taylor before releasing her own solo work. Tragically, her life and career were spiralling due to substance abuse. The song was a heartfelt plea from Jennings and Winwood to their friend to get clean. The famous line describing her as being cool like jazz on a summer's day was also a direct nod to the famous 1959 Newport Jazz Festival documentary film. Fortunately, the track got a second lease of life. In 1987, producer Tom Lord-Alge remixed the song with punchier drum production for Winwood's compilation album Chronicles. This 1987 version exploded, reaching number 9 in the US and number 19 in the UK. But of course, the story of Valerie does not end in the 1980s. Fast forward to 2004, when Swedish electronic producer Eric Prydz released a house anthem called Call on Me. The track was explicitly inspired by an unreleased live club track created by the French house duo Together, which was Thomas Banghalter of Daft Punk and DJ Falcon. They'd sampled Winwood's melody during their 2002 DJ sets. When Ministry of Sound pushed to clear the track through official channels, the production was presented to Steve Winwood himself. He was so genuinely impressed by Prydz's house arrangement that he actually went into the studio and re-recorded his original vocals to perfectly match the updated dance track. Call on Me became an absolute monster, spending 5 weeks at number 1 on the UK singles chart. Of course, it's impossible to talk about Call on Me without mentioning its notorious music video. Directed by Hughes Monferradi, the video featured a group of dancers in high-cut 80s leotards performing a highly suggestive aerobics routine. It became a massive pop culture phenomenon right at MTV's absolute musical apex. Though Prydz grew exhausted by its massive commercial shadow, so much so he refused to play it live for nearly 2 decades, he finally broke the ban by performing it at a live show in Austin, Texas. But Steve Winwood, from a teenage prodigy in Birmingham to an 80s synth pioneer, and finally to a 2000s club icon, Steve Winwood's Valerie proved that a great melody never truly dies. What an explosive start to playlist 48. But do make sure you come back next week, as this week may have introduced Tears for Fears, but next week we finally meet a certain Mr. Andrew Ridgeley and a certain Mr. George Michael and begin to tell the story of Wham. Toya is also back with another anthem. Julio Iglesias is still proving to be a peerless knicker-dropper. Kid Creole keep bringing more hits than you remember. We meet Blue Zoo, and Kool and the Gang take us dancing to the finale. So until next week, let's keep hoping for rain. It's certainly parched here in Northampton. And we'll see you next time on I Completed 80s Music. Take care.